quite a bit of vocabulary today just to kind of talk about, go ahead, talk about the different types of polynomials today. We talked about monomials last chapter. We polynomials today. So some of the vocab words are ones we've learned before, but you have to be comfortable with them, or I need you guys to be comfortable with them in order to use them in this chapter as well. So if you guys recall, last chapter we talked about terms are separated by addition and subtraction. Separated by addition and subtraction. So I'm going to show you guys some examples of things with terms, multiple different types of terms. So we'll talk about one term, two terms, three, and then four or more are all grouped into the same heading. They stop being more specific at that point. Can you stop please, David? So we talked about one term all last chapter. Do you guys remember what those were called? Just one term? Monomial, yep. So that was last chapter. We talked about monomials. So something like this would be a monomial. One term, there's no addition or subtraction. Now, the way we add another term is basically put addition and subtraction in there. So if I break this up and put a plus sign between them instead, now this becomes two terms. It's separated by addition and subtraction. So the one term is the 7x to the third. The second one is the y to the second. Any idea what we would call that? What's it? A binomial. So a binomial. Think bicycle, two wheels. So binomial. Although one wheel is not called a monocycle. Should be. There's a boy at my son's school who rides a unicycle to school. Because it's funny because on the bike rack, you know how they have all the bikes lined up, there's a unicycle sitting there. Oh yeah, that's Jacob.
Well, that guy's I bet you he gets bullied.
I bet you he does. A unicycle on your face.
He just beats some kids with a unicycle.
So what do you think three terms is called?
Trinomial.
A trinomial. You're probably less cool if you ride a tricycle to school.
What are you talking about?
No, I was a sick
Those plastic ones? Yeah, those little plastic
I
ones.
actually remember getting
the high rider.
I grew up in tricycle when I came out.
Dude, we need to buy those
It was
dresses.
super class. We had this little thing. We would run around and ride a tricycle in this
Okay.
lap, and I threw my tricycle.
Okay, so guys, this has three terms, 1, 2, 3, so it's considered a trinomial. Now, four or more, they don't keep adding on a fancy name to this, so it's not like a quadrinomial or pentanomial. They just call it poly, which means many, so a polynomial. What's that? Many sides. So polynomial is four or more. So I'll show you guys an example of that, but obviously it can be anything four or more. So,
Just do the same thing.
oh, you want to add a z in there? Okay. So I added a minus z on that. So that has four terms. And so that's considered a polynomial. Now technically, all of these these above are also, we could really just call them polynomials, just like you guys all have specific names, but I could call you guys all my students. But like when I want to specifically call on Clayton, I say Clayton's name. I don't say, hey students, what's the answer? I mean, I guess unless I'm asking you guys all, but I want to be specific, I would call it a monomial, binomial, trinomial, but really they're all polynomials in this case.
Wait, what did the first one do?
So the first one's a little bit strange. I'd probably call that one just a that's probably a good question. That one is okay, but there can be types of monomials that aren't polynomials, so it's a little bit confusing. So for the most part, they really kind of all can fall under that like big umbrella of polynomials. But I'm going to talk to you guys about what's not a polynomial though now.
Whole numbers.
Actually, those are, like just like the number 5 is a polynomial, just happens to be one term. So hang on. So you can have fractions, but they have to be a specific type, so I'll talk about that. So, hey guys. So one thing we can't have is you can't have a variable as an exponent to be a polynomial. So these are all things that aren't polynomials. So an example of that is like 5 to the x power. That's a real function. That's something we can like use in math, but it's not a polynomial. So 5 to the x power is something we use later down the road in math, but we're not going to use that today in this section. So that's not considered a polynomial. The next one does involve a fraction, but it's where the variable shows up. So you can't have a variable in the denominator. So this is not a polynomial. So some of the things we did last chapter weren't polynomials. So this would consider not a polynomial, that variable in the denominator. And the last one actually kind of relates back to that one, is basically a negative exponent of the variable. So this would be an example of not a polynomial as well. So what we're going to be working on this chapter is not things like these. Now some of these we used last chapter, that's okay, but we're not going to use them this time. And again, this will probably be the last chapter we test on. We probably will do some learning after the last test, but it'll just go on to the exam. So probably just the one more test for this semester or this year. So hopefully you guys have a little bit of space under that. If you don't, you can always put things in the margin. The next vocab word I want to mention is the word degree. I forgot to put it on here. Now, algebra and math are weird. Every once in a while there's these words, like the word term, that has a different meaning in math than it does in other places. Same thing with degree. Actually, in math, it has lots of different meanings, and in algebra, it has a different meaning than in geometry. Someone said, are they talking about temperature? No, this has nothing to do with temperature. They're not talking about angles. So degree in algebra is a little bit of a strange thing. I don't know why they didn't put it
in general in math is strange.
Well, and just saying that every time they use it, it might have a different meaning, which is a little bit confusing. But right now, we're going to deal with it this way. So it's the highest power in the variable among all terms. I'll write that out. The highest power on the variable among all terms. And I'll show you guys a couple of quick little examples. So again, if you don't have room, if you can kind of put this in the margin somewhere. I have like 7x to the third plus y to the second. We look at the two terms and we say, what's the highest power on the variable? So it would be a 3, right? That's the highest power. So this would be degree 3, or third degree. Sounds really serious. The third degree. That's the highest power on the variable among both terms. Now, the next question is, what if they're a single term? So let me show you guys this one. We won't deal with many like this. So this is kind of a special case, or kind of a strange one that should be a 2. So that's only one term. So in this case, I'm going to look at both of those degrees. It's a 3 and a 2. So this would actually be a 5th degree. Now we won't use this a ton. This is something you start using a little bit more in algebra 2. It's definitely pre-calc. They start using the degrees a little bit more, but just kind of getting comfortable with it as you guys see those. All right, we're going to go down to that example, which doesn't look like much of an example there, but we have a bunch of vocab we can talk about with that. Lots of words for our example. All right. So first of all, standard form, something we haven't talked about much with variables here. Standard form is basically writing it so everybody's looks the same. The standard notation is we want to write it from the highest power down to the lowest power. So we're going to start with the highest power and then go down to the lowest. Standard form, that way if I compare my answer to yours, ours look exactly the same. What's the highest power term here in this example? Highest power. The fourth power, right? So that 2x to the fourth is the first term then. So we're going to write this one first because it's the highest power. That all has to go together. That term stays as 1. That being said, what's going to be next? X cubed, or x to the third. That's the next highest power. And it's positive. How about next? X to the second. So I'm going to write plus because it's positive. Now what should come after that? The 5x, because it's going 4, 3, 2. This is like an x to the first 1. And then that minus 2 doesn't have an x at all, so technically it's an x to the 0. Kind of confusing, but you know, makes sense. It's not there. Okay, so that would be considered standard form. So we want to write it highest power down to the lowest. Now the leading coefficient takes you back to kindergarten. So remember when you were the line leader in kindergarten, like that was a big deal. Like you were kind of like, you know, the important like one for the day. The line leader. So in this case, the line leader is the leading coefficient. So it's the first coefficient when they're in order. So first coefficient in standard form. So that's that first number in the front. So the leading coefficient would just be 2. Now this doesn't seem all that important right now. We'll use it later in this chapter, and it'll definitely be used further in your math career, your math high school taking days, whatever that means. You'll use it again, but we'll use it later this chapter. So figuring out what that leading coefficient is going to be helpful. Now they want us to classify based on degrees. Or sorry, the number of terms. How many terms are in this? There's 5 terms here, right? Because if you look between the addition and subtraction, you can look at either, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 5 terms, so what do we call it then? Polynomial. So there's no good name for like one that's 5 specifically, so this is just considered a polynomial. And then classify based off the degree. So how many degrees, what's the degree of this one? Degree again is the highest power. So 4th degree. That's the highest power on any term. So you don't have to put all the terms together. It's a 4th degree polynomial. All right, we're gonna pause there for right now and try and get this video uploaded. We've been having issues with